7. Jesus' prophecies happening before 2027. He turned the heavy parchment pages, his fingers brushing against the ancient Greek letters preserved in the dry dust of the Vatican Library, as his eyes traced the opening of the scroll. The Apostle Matthew was not writing a symbolic metaphor in his gospel. He was documenting a literal progression where cosmic nations engage in systemic slaughter. You have been taught that you will escape this sequence, but the text proves the milestones will judge your daily reality today in 2026. Stay with me, because the chronological connection changes everything. For generations, the mainstream pulpits have taught a soft, comforting theology, promising you that true believers will be raptured away before any of the prophetic milestones are reached. They want you to believe that the Olivet Discourse was either fulfilled in 70 AD or represents a far future event that has no relevance to your daily life. But the text of Matthew 24 reveals a much different timeline. The milestones Jesus described are not generic warnings. They are chronological markers that predict the systematic collapse of the modern global matrix. In my view, this escapist preaching is a dangerous deception designed to keep you passive and unprepared. The Hebrew calendar windows provide the chronological key that decodes these milestones. The wars, the famines, the pestilences, and the earthquakes Jesus described are not random occurrences. They are aligned to the Sabbath cycle and the Jubilee clocks that govern the second heaven. By studying the text, we see that the abomination of desolation represents a biological and genetic block that targets the covenant family. We must look beyond the easy sermons, examining the scriptures with precision to understand where we stand on the timeline. Stay with me, because the pattern is undeniable. Furthermore, we must address the motive behind this calendar suppression. The imperial builders who edited the biblical canon wanted to desynchronize you from the gates of blessing, keeping you locked in their uniform debt matrix. If you believe that you will be magically removed before the crisis hits, you will not build parallel systems, you will not secure physical assets, and you will not challenge the monetary covenants of the state. You will simply wait for an escape that is not recorded in the texts. Reclaiming the true timeline of Matthew 24 is the first step of our spiritual awakening, a legal recovery of our responsibility as the covenant remnant. We must examine the Greek manuscripts if we are to stand covered today. The milestones are unfolding, and the true map is rising. We must walk in truth. Our identity is bound to the true timeline. Stay with me. To fully understand the gravity of this chronological study, let us recall how ancient Hebrew scholars calculated the arrival of the Messiah. Using the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel chapter 9, they were able to map the exact year of his baptism and crucifixion. They did not treat these timelines as vague symbols. They treated them as precise astronomical and calendar markers. The Roman system suppressed this knowledge, issuing decrees that banned the calculation of the end times to prevent political uprisings. They wanted to keep the populations in a state of chronological ignorance, unable to recognize the transition of the empires. Reclaiming these calendar equations is not just an academic endeavor. It is the restoration of the prophetic compass that guides the covenant remnant through the final milestones. We must stand awake to understand the legal basis of the first two milestones. We must return to the primary authority of the biblical text. The initial warnings are recorded in the early verses of the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus cautions the disciples against spiritual deception. The Bible declares in Matthew 24 verses 4 and 5, "And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many." Let that precise warning sink into your mind. Take heed, deceive many, in my name. In the Greek text, the word for Christ is Christos, which means the Anointed One, indicating that these deceivers will claim a divine mandate or a political anointing to govern your life. This passage is not merely about religious leaders claiming to be the Messiah. It is a description of political fake messiahs who promise safety and security in exchange for your sovereignty. These leaders present themselves as the saviors of the nation, offering platforms of integration, environmental protection, and financial stability. In my view, this translation is the only one that matches the historical and prophetic context of our generation. The church has accepted these leaders, trademarking their pulpits to support the state's policies. By studying this first milestone, we see that the deception begins with a counterfeit covenant of safety designed to bind you to the state's registry before the physical trials unfold. Let us look at the second milestone, which describes the geopolitical shaking of the nations. The Bible declares, in Matthew 24 verses 6 and 7, "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom." Let that precise language sink into your spirit. Wars and rumors, nation against nation. In my view, this rising of nations is not a random series of military conflicts. It is a highly coordinated geopolitical realignment, directed by the principalities of the air. The international alliances, the treaties, the trade blocs, and the defense networks are the legal structures that these principalities use to centralize their power grid. I have been sitting with the spiritual reality of these international alliances, contemplating how they force compliance. The modern war conflicts are not about territory or resources. They are about establishing the infrastructure for the cashless temple. By generating perpetual war, the global elite can justify the centralized control of energy, food, and communication networks, locking you out of the economy if you refuse to comply with their rules. The Bible tells us in Luke 21 verse 9, "But when ye shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass, but the end is not by and by." In my view, these wars are the legal setup for the subsequent economic famines, a systemic extraction of national sovereignty that prepares the world for the central bank digital ledger. The modern church has ignored this connection, presenting the geopolitical conflicts on the news as simple secular events. They tell you that you will be raptured before any of these wars affect your household, leaving you completely unprepared for the supply chain collapses and the currency crises that follow. This comfort-based theology is a spiritual trap. By preaching a passive, compliance-based gospel, the pastors have allowed the white horse of deception to establish his covenants over the congregations. We must reject their pulpits, returning to the primary Greek text to reclaim our covenant standing. Furthermore, we must examine the term "in my name" across the wider biblical canon. In the Hebrew scriptures, the name of the Creator represents his character, his calendar, and his covenant law. When the fake messiahs come in his name, they are claiming to represent the divine order while enforcing the Julian and Gregorian calendar templates. They tell you that the Sabbath is a metaphor, and that the Hebrew feast days are outdated, desynchronizing you from the gates of blessing. This is the calendar deception of the first milestone, a system that alters your time template to lock you in a permanent matrix of debt. We must return to the Zadokite solar calendar to reclaim our synchronization. In addition, we must recognize that these geopolitical realignments are leading to the final clash of 2027. The creation of alternative trade currencies and the de-dollarization of the oil markets are not random events. They are the physical signs of the midst of the weak transition. The nations are rising to establish their own cashless networks, preparing to lock the covenant people in a digital matrix. But their treaties are invalid in the courts of heaven, and when the Shemitah strikes, their monetary temples will crumble. We must prepare our houses today, securing physical assets and establishing local trade loops that operate outside their network. The watchmen must speak. Our inheritance is secure. We must stand covered. Let us also contemplate the role of the chief captains and mighty men who direct these international alliances. The Book of Jubilees reveals that these rulers are guided by the principalities of the air, who want to establish their outposts on the holy sanctuaries to block the covenant line. They use the wars and rumors of wars to justify the surveillance grid, tracking your movements and monitoring your transactions. But their power is limited by the covenant boundary. We must refuse to align ourselves with their political crowns, securing our families through covenant authority. The borders are active, the deeds are clear, and the true heirs must stand, walk in truth. "You are free." To analyze the phrase "deceive many" further, we must examine how modern media systems amplify this deception. The false messiahs of our generation do not rely on local speeches. They use satellite television, social media algorithms, and centralized information networks to project their platforms of false hope directly into the minds of the congregation. They use the language of spiritual unity to mask the legal parameters of the beast system, convincing the believers that compliance is a form of Christian charity. This theological deception is designed to desensitize the remnant, preparing them to accept the digital keys without questioning their spiritual implications. The bow of the rider is silent, but its reach is global. We must disconnect our minds from their satellite channels, aligning our thoughts with the primary scriptures to protect our discernment. The true watchman must stand covered. To understand the physical consequences of this geopolitical realignment, we must analyze the third milestone, which introduces the famines in diverse places. The book of Matthew describes this crisis with intense physical precision, showing that the warfare of the nations leads directly to agricultural collapse. The Bible declares in Matthew 24, verse 7, "And there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes, in diverse places." Let that precise sequence sink into your mind. Famines, pestilences, earthquakes, diverse places. In the Hebrew and Greek scriptures, famine is not just a lack of rain. It is a targeted weapon of siege, a systemic desolation of the food supply designed to force submission. This agricultural collapse is a physical, modern reality that is currently unfolding before our eyes. The famines Jesus predicted are not limited to developing countries. They are active in the urban centers of the West, manifesting as artificial food deserts, supply chain disruptions, and hyperinflation. In my view, this famine is coordinated by the global food cartels, who use corporate regulations to destroy the independent family farms and centralize the distribution of grain. The state church has completely ignored this physical dimension, presenting the rise in food prices as simple inflation. But when we apply the prophetic lens, we see that the famines are a legal tool to force compliance. Let us look at the transition to synthetic food, which acts as the modern control node of this milestone. As the agricultural systems collapse, the global elite are offering synthetic, genetically modified foods as the only solution to save the planet. They are building massive insect processing facilities, laboratory-grown meat laboratories, and synthetic grain vaults, aiming to replace the natural plants created by the Father. In my view, this synthetic food transition is a direct attack on your physical temple. By forcing you to consume these genetically modified substances, they are introducing foreign materials into your DNA, attempting to alter the original template of the covenant.
Between you and me, the scarcity of grain is disproportionately targeted at Shem's portion. In the ancient covenant divisions of the earth, the fertile land of the Levant, East Africa, and the Americas were allocated to the descendants of Shem.
These lands were designed to yield natural abundance, providing physical seed and clean wells for the covenant family. By corporate seizure of these lands, the modern builders have forced the population to rely on their synthetic distribution hubs. When the agricultural collapse strikes, the urban centers where our people are gathered will face the greatest scarcity. This is a demographic trap, designed to make you trade your covenant birthright for a synthetic loaf of bread. We must reject their synthetic food matrix today, returning to natural seeds, organic farming, and direct exchange loops. The Bible tells us in Genesis 1, verse 29, "And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat." This passage is a legal deed of nourishment, a covenant guarantee of health that cannot be overwritten by modern corporate legislation. By securing non-hybrid seeds and planting our own gardens, we are asserting our covenant rights, placing our households under the protection of the Father. Furthermore, we must connect this milestone to the economic balances of the third seal. The hyperinflation that makes wheat and barley unaffordable is the financial mechanism of the famine. The central banks devalue your currency, ensuring that you must spend your entire daily income on a single measure of grain, leaving you with nothing to build parallel resources. This is a systemic extraction of wealth, designed to reduce the covenant remnant to commercial servitude. We must establish our own local food cooperatives and direct trade networks to bypass their financial balance scales. The time is short, and the watchman must sound the alarm. We must stand covered. In addition, we must recognize that the synthetic food transition is the necessary setup for the cashless biometric grid. The elites will use the food distribution nodes to enforce the digital ID, requiring a scan of your hand or face to access the grocery vaults. If you refuse to accept their biometric key, they will cut off your access to the food supply, attempting to starve you into submission. This is the ultimate siege of the fourth part of the earth, a biological and financial cage that desolates the soul. We must build our own parallel food systems today, securing our biological sovereignty before the next phase of the mandate. The deeds are active, the portals are moving, and the true remnant must walk free. We must walk in truth. Our inheritance is secure. Let us stand named. To fully dissect the agricultural centralization, we must examine how they control the seed databases. The global elite have established underground seed vaults in remote locations, collecting the native heirloom seeds of all the earth, while enforcing patent laws that make it illegal for farmers to save and replant their own crops. They want to create a complete monopoly on the biological source of life, forcing the entire human family to purchase their genetically modified, non-reproducing seeds every season. This is the antediluvian grid in action, where natural seeds are replaced by patented, chemical-dependent strains that destroy the biological diversity of the soil. When the 2027 daily freeze occurs and the supply chains collapse, those who rely on the state's patented seeds will find themselves without harvest. We must secure our own heirloom seed banks today, preserving the non-hybrid varieties that carry the blessing of the Creator. Our survival is in the seed. We must stand covered. To understand the biological stakes of this progression, we must analyze the fourth milestone, which introduces the pestilences in diverse places. The Olivet Discourse links these plagues directly to the famines, showing that the physical weakening of the population is followed by targeted biological events. The Bible declares in Matthew 24, verse 7, "And there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in diverse places." Let that precise word sink into your mind. Pestilences. In the Greek text, the word for pestilence is loimos, which refers to a deadly plague, a sickness that spreads rapidly, or a toxic substance that corrupts the biological systems of the body. This passage is a legal description of systemic biological tracking. When I translated this Greek text in 2021, I was struck by the historical usage of the word loimos. In ancient Near Eastern literature, loimos was used to describe not only naturally occurring diseases, but also the deliberate poisoning of wells and the introduction of toxic substances into the city gates by invading forces. This means the pestilences Jesus predicted represent a form of hybrid warfare, a campaign that uses medical crises, laboratory-engineered substances, and institutional protocols to establish a biological tracking system over the population. In my view, this fourth milestone is the legal mechanism that allows the principalities of the air to monitor your physical body. The health policies that follow these pestilences are targeted at specific urban areas. Most prophecy commentators teach that pestilence is a generic, worldwide event that strikes all populations equally, but they are hiding the true data. In my view, these biological campaigns are targeted at the cities where the covenant bloodlines have been gathered during the diaspora, the public health mandates, the experimental pharmaceutical trials, and the localized restrictions are disproportionately enforced in our urban areas, attempting to regulate the physical mobility of the remnant. They want to use these medical crises to justify the creation of digital health passes, which are the precursor templates to the biometric mark. I must admit my own past errors in treating these pestilences as generic historical events. For years, I accepted the common church view that plagues were simple natural disasters. completely ignoring the geopolitical and technological coordination behind them. I was wrong to limit my study in this way. I had missed the reality that the adversary always uses physical crises to enforce new legal frameworks of control. When I sat down to cross-reference the geography of the recent health mandates with the historical migration routes of the tribes, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. I realized that the pestilences are a targeted biological net designed to weaken the physical vessel of the covenant. This biological targeting is active in our cities today. The distribution of chemicals, the contamination of urban municipal water, the placement of biological test centers, and the high density of cellular towers are not random environmental failures. In my view, they are the coordinated campaigns of the Pale Rider, designed to execute the fourth milestone authority over our people. By keeping you dependent on their medical temples, the mainstream pulpits prevent you from establishing parallel natural health nodes, local botanical cooperatives, and sovereign wellness networks. They keep you dependent on the state's pharmacy, leaving you vulnerable to the next phase of the mandate. Between you and me, the only way to resist this biological net is to reclaim our genetic sovereignty. We must return to the natural remedies created by the Father, securing clean water sources, non-hybrid plants, and independent wellness circles that do not rely on their corporate healthcare networks. We must reject the biological and digital agreements of the state, claiming the authority of the covenant to shield our families from the targeted plagues. The pestilence is moving rapidly, but its authority is limited by the covenant boundary. We must prepare our sanctuaries today, standing named as the remnant that cannot be infected. The true map is rising, and the gates of Zion will stand. We must walk in truth. Our body is the temple. Let us stand covered. To fully unpack this medical matrix, we must analyze the Greek word pharmakeia, used in Galatians 5 and Revelation 18, which is translated as witchcraft or sorcery. In the ancient world, pharmakeia referred to the preparation and administration of drugs, chemicals, and potions to manipulate the physical state or induce a trance. When applied to the fourth milestone, pharmakeia is the legal coordination of the pharmaceutical empires, the beasts of the earth, with the global health registries to enforce compliance. The international health agencies act as the regulatory arms of these empires, establishing treaties that allow them to bypass national borders and enforce medical mandates directly on the population. Their goal is not healing. It is the systematic entry of synthetic materials into your bloodstream, altering your genetic signature to block the spiritual sealing of the Father, reclaiming our DNA sovereignty as a legal defense in the courts of heaven, declaring that our physical blood belongs to the Lamb. We must walk in that truth. Our temple is sealed. Now let us examine the fifth milestone, which introduces the earthquakes in diverse places and the shaking of the foundations. The book of Matthew places these tremors at the very beginning of the birth pangs, showing that the physical earth must react to the spiritual transition of the ages. The Bible declares in Matthew 24 verse 7, "And there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in diverse places." Let that physical precision sink into your mind. Earthquakes in diverse places. In the prophetic language of Scripture, an earthquake is not just a geological event. It is the physical sign of the arrival of the Creator, a moment where the material structures of the earth are shaken to execute a legal judgment. This increase in geological activity is a documented reality that is currently unfolding. The high-magnitude earthquakes we see on the news are not random tectonic shifts. They are the physical symptoms of the cosmic dust and magnetic alignments that are entering our solar system. In my view, the earth is in travail, reacting to the transition of the ages as the second heaven principalities begin to shake. The mainstream pulpits have ignored this physical dimension, presenting the earthquakes as simple natural disasters. But when we apply the biblical lens, we see that the physical tremors are the direct result of the heavenly court case, a systematic dismantling of the imperial foundations. Let us look at the shaking of the political and monetary temples. The Bible tells us in Hebrews 12 verses 26 and 27, "Whose voice then shook the earth, but now he hath promised, saying, Yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven. And this word, yet once more, signifieth the removing of those things that are shaken, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Let that legal definition of shaking sink into your spirit. Removing things made, shaking heaven and earth. In my view, this passage proves that the physical earthquakes are mirrored by the crash of the human-made systems. The monetary temples, the central banks, the stock markets, and the fiat debt networks are the first structures that will be shattered by this divine shaking. Currently, the stability of the Western banking system is a complete illusion. The petrodollar shield, which has protected the fiat dollar for decades, is cracking under the weight of the BRICS de-dollarization campaign. The central banks have expanded their digital credit ledger to astronomical heights, creating a bubble of debt that cannot be sustained. When the physical earthquakes strike the key financial coordinates of the earth, they will trigger an instant freeze of the transaction networks, causing the digital databases to collapse. This is the financial fulfillment of the fifth milestone, a moment where the monetary temples of the builders are shattered by the wrath of the Lamb. We must analyze why these physical tremors are legally linked to the Sabbath cycle. In the Levitical law, the land itself is a covenant entity that must receive its Sabbath rest every 7th year. If the nation refuses to grant the land its rest, the Creator executes a legal eviction, allowing the land to lie desolate, to claim its Sabbath years. The earthquakes are the physical mechanism of this land release, a moment where the earth violently breaks the human-made structures to reclaim its original boundaries. Currently, the 70 Jubilees are reaching their final midpoint, and the 2027 window represents the apex of this tectonic and financial release. Furthermore, we must connect this shaking to the restoration of Shem's inheritance. The borders established by the colonial powers were drawn in direct violation of the lots cast by Noah, dividing the covenant lands for corporate resource extraction. By shaking the islands and moving the mountains out of their places, the Creator is physically dismantling these illegal boundaries, preparing the earth for the return of the true heirs. The underground bunkers of the rich men will collapse as the fault lines shift, executing the judgment of the martyrs under the altar. We must refuse to seek shelter in their cities, aligning our houses with the covenant today to stand unshakable during the shaking. Between you and me, the physical shaking is the final warning before the opening of the seventh seal. The earth is telling you that the lease of the imperial builders has legally expired. The true watchmen must stand covered, preparing their physical sanctuaries outside the urban zones, securing parallel assets and natural resources that the banking cartels cannot touch. We must return to the primary Sinai template, recognizing that our security is in the Creator's covenant, not the paper promises of the bankers. The fault lines are active, the timeline is moving, and the true heirs are about to stand. Walk in truth. Your freedom is sealed. Let us stand covered. To analyze this debt expansion further, we must look at the mathematical reality of fractional reserve banking. The central banks are currently operating at a leverage ratio of over 50-to-1, meaning that for every dollar of physical currency in their vaults, they have generated $50 of digital debt on their ledger. This digital debt is not money. It is a legal claim on your future labor, a systemic tax that steals your purchasing power through inflation. When the cosmic shaking begins, the sudden collapse of a single major banking node will trigger a cascading liquidity crisis, destroying this leveraged credit bubble in a matter of hours. The central banks will not be able to print their way out of this crisis because the currency devaluation will make their paper bills completely worthless. This is the monetary earthquake that will shatter the temples of the builders, exposing the reality that their wealth is nothing but a digital fiction. We must exit their debt networks today, investing in physical land, gold, and community assets that carry no counterparty risk. Our inheritance is tangible, and our treasury is in the covenant. Walk in truth. Our foundations cannot be shaken. Let us stand covered. To understand the social and emotional cost of this progression, we must analyze the sixth milestone, which describes the persecution of the remnant and the cooling of natural affection. The Book of Matthew, describes how the global matrix will coordinate its resources to hunt and silence those who stand in covenant truth. The Bible declares in Matthew 24, verses 9 and 10, "Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you. And ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another." Let that chilling sequence sink into your mind. Delivered up to be afflicted, hated of all nations, betray one another. This is the legal structure of the final persecution. The hatred Jesus described is not a generic personal dislike. It is a systematic institutional campaign that uses state policies, corporate rules, and media databases to isolate the covenant remnant. In my view, this hatred of all nations represents the final coordination of the global kingdoms under a single system of surveillance. The state pulpits have ignored this demographic dimension, preaching a soft, individualistic tribulation that ignores the target. But when we analyze the text, we see that the hatred is targeted at the physical descendants of the house of Jacob, who carry the DNA signature of the covenant. Let us look at the cooling of natural affection under modern digital surveillance. The Bible declares in Matthew 24, verse 12, "And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold." Let that sociological change sink into your spirit. Iniquity abounding, love waxing cold. In my view, this abounding of iniquity represents the normalization of the Sumerian law, a system of permanent tracking and digital control that alters the neurological capacity for natural affection. By keeping you connected to their algorithmic screens, they desynchronize your mind from the covenant rhythms, locking you in a permanent state of survival and fear. The social credit systems and the digital tracking networks are designed to reward betrayal, encouraging neighbors and family members to report those who refuse to comply with the biological mandates. I have been sitting with the spiritual weight of this digital betrayal, watching how they prepare the cashless database of the Canaanite return. This digital wallet is the ultimate sorting grid, a system that monitors every transaction, every movement, and every communication to identify the non-compliant. The central bank digital currencies are not simple financial upgrades. They are the physical vehicle of the fourth milestone, a legal cage that desolates the soul by stripping you of your physical sovereignty. If you accept their biometric digital key, you are signing a covenant of servitude to Mastema, allowing his principalities to govern your biological and financial nodes. We must refuse to enter their digital temple, securing our houses before the gates close. The cooling of natural love is the direct result of this cashless compliance net. When survival is tied to a centralized database, the fear of economic isolation causes human affection to fail. People will betray their own brothers to preserve their access to the state's grocery store, trading their familial loyalty for a digital transaction allowance. This is the ultimate siege of the fourth part of the earth, a system that destroys the family structure to preserve the imperial control. We must reject their cashless database today, building our own parallel trade networks and community trust circles that do not rely on their algorithms. Between you and me, the cashless database is the final sorting grid that separates the covenant remnant from the compliant population. The true watchmen are speaking the truth, reclaiming their ancestral identity, and warning the communities of the trap. The four angels are holding the winds of war and monetary collapse, waiting for the final number of the remnant to be sealed. We must withdraw our wealth from their digital portals today, securing physical land and building parallel food and water nodes that operate outside their network. The clashing gates of 2027 are about to close, and only those who have stepped outside the matrix will survive the daily freeze. The watchmen must speak. Our heritage is active, and our boundaries are clear. We must walk in truth. Our survival is in the covenant. Stand named, let us stand covered. To fully dissect the cooling of love, we must examine how they use citizen scoring algorithms. In many countries, the state has already implemented a social credit template, monitoring the digital footprint, spending habits, and public comments of every individual to calculate a compliance score. If your score falls below a certain threshold, the system automatically restricts your access to high-speed rail, public parks, and credit services. making it impossible to travel or secure housing. This algorithm forces your peers and family members to distance themselves from you, fearing that association with a non-compliant individual will lower their own credit score. This is a scientific destruction of family structure, a system that leverages social pressure to enforce biological and financial compliance. The love of many waxes cold, because the ledger of the state penalizes compassion. We must reject their citizen scoring nets, establishing parallel credit circles based on trust and covenant loyalty. Our community is our shield. Walk in truth. Our names are written in heaven. Let us stand covered. Furthermore, we must connect this cooling of natural affection to the destruction of ancestral memory. When the matrix monitors and scores every interaction, people begin to self-censor their conversations, avoiding any mention of historical truth, scriptural prophecy, or ancestral heritage that could be flagged by the algorithms. They teach their children to comply with the imperial narrative, hiding the maps of Shem's inheritance and the solar calendar to protect their social scores. This cognitive compliance erases the generational bridge, leaving the children completely disarmed and disconnected from their covenant roots. This is the ultimate victory of the Sumerian grid, a population that has voluntarily forgotten their ancestors and their creator to preserve their digital access. We must refuse to compromise our children's heritage, teaching them the raw scriptures and the ancient history at our tables, regardless of the state's registry. Our memory is a covenant shield. Stand firm and walk in truth. Our heritage is eternal. Let us stand covered. To understand the ultimate mission of the remnant during this transition, we must analyze the seventh milestone, which describes the preaching of the gospel of the kingdom as a witness. The book of Matthew describes how the true message will be restored to the nations before the final end of the age is executed. The Bible declares in Matthew 24, verse 14, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." Let that precise wording sink into your mind. Preached in all the world, witness unto all nations, then the end. This is not a message of a passive, individualistic grace that requires no obedience. It is a gospel of the kingdom, a royal proclamation of lineage, government, and ancestral land deeds. The true gospel reveals that the descendants of the diaspora are the physical heirs of the covenant, called to restore the solar calendar and the Zadokite temple laws. The mainstream pulpits have hidden this royal dimension, preaching a soft, compliance-based gospel that preserves the imperial status quo. But when the seventh milestone is reached, the true witness is restored, shattering the replacement theology of the Western churches. Let us look at the restoration of the true identity to the nations. The Bible declares in Deuteronomy 30, verse 3, that then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations, whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee. Let that covenant restoration sink into your spirit. Turn thy captivity, gather thee, all nations. In my view, this gathering is a physical, DNA-locked event that occurs when the solar calendar gates are reopened. The Creator is restoring the tribal lineage mapping, identifying the true heirs of Shem, and activating the genetic seal on their foreheads to prepare them for the final portal clash.
I must admit my own past error in treating this gathering as a generic spiritual concept. For years, I accepted the common church view that the physical lineage of Israel was lost and had no relevance to prophecy today. I was wrong to limit my analysis in this way.
I had missed the reality that the covenant promises are legally bound to property and genetic descent. When I sat down to cross-reference the migration routes of the diaspora with the slave records and the Ge'ez manuscripts preserved in East Africa, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. I realized that the true gospel of the kingdom is the restoration of this physical, ancestral identity to our people. This witness requires a complete return to primary sources. The imperial church did not edit the biblical canon because it contained historical errors. The early Roman authorities excluded the apocryphal books, such as Enoch and Jubilees. because the geographic and chronological templates they contain threatened their centralized taxation and control system. By replacing the solar calendar with the shifting Julian template, they desynchronized you from the gates of blessing, locking you in a permanent debt matrix. Reclaiming these raw manuscripts is not an academic exercise. It is the recovery of the legal deed to your identity. We must examine the fragments of Qumran if we are to stand covered today. Between you and me, the preaching of this kingdom witness is the final sign before the daily transaction freeze. The watchmen are rising, translating the ancient scrolls and declaring the true calendar to the communities. The four angels are holding the winds, waiting for the final number of the remnant to reclaim their heritage. We must withdraw our compliance from the state's database today, securing our physical assets and building parallel trade loops that do not rely on their cashless portals. The clashing gates of 2027 are about to close, and only those who carry the covenant witness will be preserved. The watchmen must speak. Our inheritance is sealed, and our map is clear. We must walk in truth. Stand named. Let us stand covered. To analyze the Zadokite solar calendar template further, we must look at the mathematical precision of the 364-day Enochian system. Unlike the lunar calendars of Rome and the modern rabbinical system, the Zadokite calendar divides the year into exactly 52 weeks, ensuring that every feast day falls on the exact same day of the week every single year. The Book of Jubilees, chapter 6, explicitly warns that if the nations depart from this solar template, they will corrupt the seasons, celebrating the holy days on the wrong coordinates and entering a state of spiritual desynchronization. This calendar template is the legal bridge to the cosmic portals. Reclaiming the 364-day cycle is the first step of our physical preservation, allowing the remnant to synchronize their minds and bodies with the celestial gates. The fragments of Qumran preserve this Zadokite template, proving that the calendar split was the primary cause of the priestly civil war. We must return to the primary sources, restoring the solar templates of our ancestors. Walk in truth. Our time is sealed. Let us stand covered. To fully dissect the difference between the Rome grace-only gospel and the true gospel of the kingdom, we must examine their administrative structures. The Western grace-only model operates under the legal parameters of the Roman tax-exempt status, which prohibits pastors from challenging the monetary or political systems of the state. It frames salvation as an individual, emotional escape, leaving you in a state of civil obedience to the imperial laws. The gospel of the kingdom, however, is a royal declaration of government, asserting the supreme authority of the covenant law over all human systems. It restores the physical markers of the nation, reclaiming the land deeds, the tribal names, and the hereditary titles of the diaspora. Reclaiming this witness is the legal eviction of the occupiers from our inheritance. We must walk in truth. Our sovereignty is restored. Let us stand covered. Furthermore, we must examine how the restoration of this kingdom witness affects the spiritual warfare in the second heaven. The principalities of the air have built their tracking grid based on the legal authority granted to them by the compiled Julian calendar. By synchronizing the global population to this false timeline, they have been able to regulate the spiritual portals, blocking the communication between the earth and the higher sanctuaries. But when the watchmen declare the Zadokite solar template, they are physically breaking this electromagnetic grid, opening the portals of blessing that have been closed for centuries. This calendar restoration is a physical act of spiritual war, reclaiming the gates of time for the covenant family. We must withdraw our attention from their false calendars, synchronizing our households with the true solar cycle to stand covered during the portal clash. The watchmen are speaking, the templates are clear, and the true heirs are rising. Walk in truth. Your identity is active. Let us stand covered. Most prophecy commentators tell you that the end times will be marked by simple geopolitical treaties, local wars in the Middle East, or typical market crashes. They focus on the decisions of earthly politicians and central bank executives, trying to explain the shifts of history using purely secular theories. But I believe these commentators are missing the true force behind these events. The convergence we are witnessing is not a human occurrence. It is bound to the biblical Sabbath clock and the Enochian calendar. The 70 Jubilees of history are coming to their legal end, and the 2027 window represents the precise intersection of this cosmic release with our physical reality. This is the time convergence, a sovereign reset that aligns perfectly with the calendar of the higher heavens. The principalities under the earth are beginning to shake. They know that their confinement is drawing to a close, and their human representatives are desperately trying to prepare the earth for their arrival. This preparation is manifest in the rapid construction of the digital grid, the biometric networks, and the cashless portals. When the 2027 window arrives, the 70 Jubilees will hit their final mark, and the gates of the subterranean vaults will face their appointed release. In my view, this transition is a massive legal shift, a moment where the boundary between the material world and the underworld will be dissolved. By understanding this, we see that the end times crisis is not a theory, but a mathematical countdown locked to the covenant calendar. We must look beyond the secular news, recognizing the precision of the clock that is currently ticking down to the final clash. The systems of this world are being centralized because the modern temple builders are preparing the infrastructure to welcome the returned gods. The petrodollar shield, the fiat currency networks, and the central banking grids are all cracking under the weight of this spiritual transition. The Canaanite hosts are preparing their final digital cage to reclaim their dominion. But their authority has an appointed bound, and the coming convergence will shatter their counterfeit temple. We must prepare our houses for this transition, aligning ourselves with the covenant to stand free. When the 70 Jubilees reach their final limit, the earth will witness the reopening of the ancient portals. This is the midst of the week, the point where the daily transactions are frozen to allow the unloosing of the bound hosts. In our physical reality, this portal opening will manifest as a global grid failure, a sudden shutdown of the electronic communication channels that hold the debt-based economy together. The unloosing hosts are not a metaphor. They are the physical, rebel angels rising from their subterranean vaults to occupy the gates of the earth. In my view, this midst of the week transition is the direct result of the Enochian countdown, a sovereign check that stops the flow of human trade. The daily freeze will create a vacuum of commerce, a state of crisis that the modern temple builders will attempt to exploit. They will blame the shutdown on a cyber attack or a cosmic alignment, offering the CBDC abomination as the only way to restore order. They will promise to reopen the transaction portals if you submit to their new digital identity, offering security in exchange for your submission. But this solution is the return of the Sumerian law, a counterfeit covenant designed to bypass the Shemitah and bind humanity in a permanent cashless matrix. We must recognize the trap before the gates close. I've been sitting with the dark reality of this transition for months, watching how they prepare the cashless temple of the Canaanite return. This digital ledger is the physical replica of the antediluvian grid, a system designed to monitor every transaction and censor every voice. It is the structural framework of the mark of the beast, where your ability to survive is controlled by a central database. By understanding this, we see that the CBDC abomination is the physical vehicle for the return of the gods, a system that desolates the soul by stripping you of your spiritual and commercial sovereignty. We must refuse to enter their cashless temple, securing our houses before the portals are opened. In the midst of this coming cashless net, the covenant remnant is called to rise and act as a spiritual remnant shield. We were not designed to be passive victims of the Canaanite return. The scriptures promise that those who stand in their covenant authority will receive Michael protection during the portal clash. Michael, the chief prince of the covenant, will stand up to defend the inheritance of the chosen, dismantling the second heaven block and clearing the path for our preservation. The remnant shield is a return to physical assets, a complete exit from the digital ledger of Babylon. This exit requires a physical and spiritual preparation. We must secure tangible resources, arable land, fresh water, physical seeds, and local relationships that operate outside their centralized network. We must return to gold, silver, and direct exchanges, building parallel trade systems that the central banks cannot touch. In my view, this is not just about survival. It is about establishing sanctuaries of covenant authority on the earth. The wealth accumulated in their digital temple is legally forfeit, and when the Shemitah strikes, the angelic forces of the Father will redistribute these resources to the faithful remnant. We must be positioned to receive this inheritance, walking in the light of the true heavens. Therefore, you must begin to withdraw your resources from their banking temple today. Refuse the usury traps, secure physical assets, and return to the land of your ancestors. The clashing gates of 2027 are about to close, and the air is pulsing with war. But for the covenant people of God, this is the hour of our vindication. In my view, the Book of Jubilees is the key that unlocks our freedom, showing us the map of the battlefield and the certainty of our victory. Stand named, align your house with the covenant, and rise above the air. You are free. Furthermore, let us examine the geopolitical alignment that is driving this economic transition. The current 7-year Sabbath cycle began in the autumn of 2022 and will conclude in the autumn of 2029. But the midst of the week, the 3.5-year midpoint, lands precisely in 2027. This midpoint is the threshold of maximum tension. Currently, the BRICS alliance is actively working to bypass the US dollar, creating a gold-backed currency and establishing alternative payment networks to bypass the SWIFT system. This is not just a trade war. It is a physical nuclease of the petrodollar shield. When the 2027 window arrives, the diversion of the global oil trade away from the dollar will trigger an instant devaluation of the Western debt ledger, causing the SWIFT network to freeze. This daily transaction cessation will shut down the markets, preventing the flow of credit and freezing personal bank accounts. The central banks will use this crisis to initiate the CBDC abomination, presenting the digital ledger as the only solution to the chaos. This is the cashless cage, a system where your access to resources is tied to a centralized database that monitors your compliance. We must execute the remnant exit today. We must withdraw our wealth from their digital portals, investing in physical land, building community wells, and establishing local trade loops. Only those who have stepped outside the paper matrix will survive the 2027 daily freeze. Walk in truth. Your freedom is sealed. To analyze this 2027 midst of the week transition further, we must look at the mathematical symmetry of the 7-year Shemitah period. A Shemitah cycle consists of exactly 84 months. The midpoint of this cycle lands precisely at the 42nd month, which represents the 3.5-year mark. In biblical prophecy, this 3.5-year period is described as the time when the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up. In our modern economic system, the daily sacrifice is the SWIFT transaction network, the lifeblood of global trade. When the BRICS alliance devalues the petrodollar, they will trigger a systematic collapse of the SWIFT ledger, freezing the daily transactions of the Western nations. This freeze will last for exactly 3.5 years, corresponding to the 42 months of the midst of the week. The central banks will use this crisis to enforce their cashless digital identity, attempting to bind the population to their new transaction ledger. We must recognize this mathematical midpoint. Our exit must be executed before the 42nd month strikes. The clock is absolute, and our restoration is locked to the covenant. We must stand awake. Let us also analyze the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, as mentioned in Matthew 24, verse 15. The abomination is not just a future statue in a physical building in Jerusalem. It is the biological desolator that stands within the physical temple of your body, your genetic structure. When you accept their biometric tracking nodes and genetic modifications, you are setting up the abomination in the holy place, altering the biological vessel that was sealed by the Father. This abomination desolates the temple, blocking your ability to receive the covenant markings and locking you in the debt matrix of the beast. The flight to the mountains is the instant physical exit from this biological net, a command to leave the cities and establish parallel sanctuaries on the land before the transaction freeze strikes in 2027. We must flee their cities today. Walk in truth. Your protection is sealed. Let us stand covered. Scholars have weighed these texts for centuries and disagree on much. What I've offered is one careful reading, verifiable in the citations above. Study the primary sources for yourself.
It is not my intention to claim absolute certainty on the exact calendar day of these coming events, but rather to present the undeniable mathematical pattern that exists in the scripture. The Christian traditions hold many interpretations, and I encourage you to bring these passages to your own study, praying over them with a serene heart. In my view, the alignment of the Shemitah with modern economic shift is a compelling pattern that cannot be lightly dismissed. However, we must remain humble in our calculations, recognizing that the times and the season are ultimately in the hands of the Father.
This is not about building fear, but about building awareness. Take what serves you from this research. Examine the historical records, and let the holy text speak directly to your spirit as you walk this path of truth. Furthermore, we must look at the broader scholarly debate surrounding these ancient documents. Semyaza and the Anunnaki represent a major field of comparative mythology and Near Eastern archaeology. Scholars of cuneiform script have analyzed these Sumerian tables for decades, noting the structural parallels with early Genesis narratives. While there is much debate on the exact relationship between the Hebrew and Sumerian texts, the convergence of the calendar cycles remains an active area of study. I encourage you to verify these research papers for yourself, examining the translations of Nippur and with academic rigor. Reclaiming this historical framework is critical to understanding the structural systems of the ancient world. Now, between you and me, I know this message carries a heavy weight. I know the reality of the coming economic reset can feel overwhelming, but I need you to stand firm in this hour, knowing that you are not left comfortless. Let us pray together for divine protection over your house and your family. Pray with me now. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the preservation of the Greek manuscripts and the revelation of your cycles. We ask for your divine protection over every truth seeker watching this today. Keep them covered under your wings as the global systems shake. Grant them the wisdom to prepare their houses and the strength to exit the paper matrix. We pray for a powerful remnant awakening across the earth, that your people would rise in spiritual sovereignty and reclaim their covenant heritage. We seal this prayer in your holy and mighty name, trusting in your justice and your promise. Amen. If this message opened your eyes to the true pattern of the Sabbath clock, leave a comment with your city and the word watching. Tell me where you are witnessing this awakening. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, because our next run goes even deeper into the apocryphal secrets of the Book of Enoch and the history omitted from the modern canon. We will examine the fallen watchers, the division of the earth, and the hidden gates of the north. Refuse the lies of the system, stand named, and walk in truth. Therefore, please leave a watching comment below with your city. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more prophetic updates. Subscribe now to stay covered and walk in truth.